Taking Great Pictures, Part 1. Original photos by Catherine P. Fulford. That's me. The first concept is to practice. You have to take a lot of pictures before you get really good at it. I have had a lot of practice because my father handed me a camera when I was just a young girl, as he was a photographer and wanted me to learn the trade. Another idea is to go places. Here's one we took in Africa on safari, another in Washington, D.C., then in Rome, Switzerland, and China. It's a lot of fun to travel, and taking pictures is part of the pleasure. Take lots of pictures. If you notice here, I've taken one, but I also took a series just to demonstrate how the picture can change. Which one do you think looks best? The next is have patience. A good picture is just right around the corner. Watch my cousins. There, that's the shot I wanted. Here, I knew the sun was coming around. Let's see what happens. We sat at this one cafe for hours watching the sunlight on the cathedral in Florence. And this bee just wasn't in the right place. Would he move? Yes, finally he did, but it took some patience. How about this lion? Isn't that a beautiful shot? But with patience, I got his roar. And this one, I had to ask the guide to stop just where I wanted him to and wait for the sunset. It was a while. The next idea is to have a lot of fun. Photography is a wonderful hobby as well as a wonderful avocation or vocation. Here we are at elephant camp in Zimbabwe. It was fun. This is when I was quite young, still taking pictures with film. You can see my camera in the hands of the statue. This was fun. I love snakes. And there's my friend Hannah as she falls down into the abyss. Next is to think about the content in your photo. You want to avoid distracting backgrounds. You can sometimes just change your angle to get a better view. Here, for example, I didn't pay attention that there was a log growing out of my husband's head. Here's a beautiful plaza in Riga, Latvia, but it's very difficult to see the statue with all of this glory behind it. If we move up closer and shoot from the bottom, we get a much nicer shot. Next, choose a plain background. Here are my cousins on a dark background. It works a lot better that way. You get much more detail. Try using angle shots to create more interest. For example, here's my home in Florida, where I grew up. It's a nice picture, but this one is much nicer and looks a lot more 3D. Here's another one. The tower is a little bit flat. Just by moving a bit, we have a much nicer picture of the tower. Here's a beautiful home in Switzerland. Looks much better on an angle. How about this one in Estonia? Much nicer. Also, you might want to think about including foreground objects. For example, here's a lovely little castle in Lithuania. It's very beautiful in this picture, but look how interesting this one is with a boat in front. I would keep both of them. Here's another one with a beautiful flower in front, and a little bit of Spain on the hill with a little bit of tree. And the goats in front provide a nice rural scene. Here I had to get way down on the ground and shoot up. This was back in the 70s in my film days. I won an honorary mention for this photograph. Here's Sugarloaf Mountain in Brazil. By just stepping back behind the beautiful foliage, it makes a much nicer picture. Here in Malaysia, many people would zoom in on the house and forget to take a picture of the boat in front. Also, consider framing your subjects. You can get natural frames in places like tunnels. Also, you might find them in places like museums, this window scene, or even using the sides of a boat or a bus. Here you can see this picture of a bad accident in Peru. By taking a picture inside of the bus, you get some distance from the action. As you zoom in closer, you can see that it gets more intense. By zooming all the way in, you create much more emotional intensity. Here's another picture using bars in a window. and another using a natural frame in a door. And here's a picture using my telephoto lens and backing up so that I get the circle of the lens around the bird. This one is at the Robin Hood tree in England. I noticed when I was standing inside of it that my friend could stand in front and make a beautiful heart. Here I am high above the city and found a perfect frame in a window. Another scene in Toronto with a tree framing my subject. And here I am as a young girl. My husband took this picture with a nice frame of ropes and ladder. Also, you might want to notice reflections. Here's one in the place that I grew up. We encounter many spectacular places when we travel. My husband is always patient and lets me get out of the car and take a picture. Isn't it beautiful? Here's a picture right outside of Rome. This is a nice shot, but look what happens when you get back further and get this reflection. And another at Hadrian's palace. I waited till the sun got just right. And this was a shot that we waited and waited on throughout our whole trip in Africa, and finally got the opportunity to take this lovely picture of a cheetah in Kenya. And then, wonderful to see him drink. This is a picture of our house in Florida, with a beautiful reflection of the river. And a picture of my friend and me on Vancouver Island. When others discovered that they could take a picture in the witch ball, they were thrilled and lined up for the fun. This is me taking a picture of an elevator in Malaysia. And another in the aquarium in Vancouver. This is a beluga whale, by the way. And here I am with another film shot from the 70s. I always thought this picture was wonderful. And another in a puddle. Another thing is look for unique subjects. They're all around. Here's one of a bridge going over to a bar in Peru. Can you imagine coming back home late at night? And oh, the food in Peru was great. And a cute little moneymaker in Russia. What a nice idea. This is in Liechtenstein. And back to the aquarium in Vancouver for a wonderful sea otter. Sometimes you just get lucky and capture the moment. Here's a beautiful shot of my aunt with her granddaughter. And this was very lucky. This is a bush baby in Africa. They're very, very fast. And it took a lot to get this shot. Ah, not in front of the company, dear. And here we have an adorable child waiting for a tip. Look what happens next. But that was my tip. And look at the I love behind this family. Isn't that lucky? That's Ireland, by the way, back in the 70s. And here we are in England at the same time period. See the mice running around the hat? And this was just too funny. In Hungary, it was really a lucky shot. People are very important in your pictures. So you can add people to add interest. This is something my mother taught me because she did a lot in the studio when I was young. Here's a beautiful picture of a church in Russia. But if I come home with that, nobody will care much until I put my husband in. Here's Machu Picchu. Gorgeous shot, but a lot more interesting with us in the foreground. Here we are in Russia, showing the native scene. You can also take people doing what comes naturally. A wonderful community in Africa, enjoying a sunny day. And back to Peru. This little girl is dressed and ready for tips. Here we are at Lake Titicaca. You can see how the natives live. And this adorable little lady in Slovakia, I kept wondering if she was going to get up on that bike and ride. And here we are in Austria at the National Library. Another cousin and my aunt. Beautiful. Another thing that makes good pictures is to be brave enough to be a picture director. This is a skill I learned early from my father, who was a wedding photographer. I used to help him set up groups. Here's a shot. Even though taken in the early days of digital photography, you can see how wonderful it is. This is the first time anybody had asked this group to pose for them in a picture. This is the captain, crew, and all of the wonderful people that had been with us on the trip. Nobody had thought to ever ask them to take a picture. After setting up the picture, I backed up to try to take it and noticed a crowd had formed behind me. They had run to get their cameras too. I said, "No, me first," and took their picture. My friends and coworkers have gotten used to me arranging them in a proper form and making sure everybody can be seen. We take lots of photographs. I always make sure to take one and say, "Okay, let's have some fun." Next, there's always graduation. It's much better to form a nice picture by arranging people. Nothing worse than having an ugly picture when everybody else got a nice one. So making sure everybody smiles, taking lots of pictures to make sure that you got a good one for everybody is important. Even in small groups, people feel honored when you help them have a good picture. You can do this even with people on the street when you travel. Say, okay, heads together. What a nice shot. Even with your relatives, you can make them look nicer, like my cousin who went up the tree for me with her climbing dog, and here posed for me on the beach. You can also help people smile. This is really important because they look best that way, there's no doubt. My father was such a jokester, I learned some of his tricks. There we go. Get those nice smiles. Capture them. Isn't she beautiful? You can do this all over the world. Even sometimes when you don't think you might be able to, you might even make a monk smile. Doesn't he look like the laughing Buddha? Find ways of engaging your subjects. One of my favorite ways is to have a camera that flips over and allows the subject to see his own picture. Look at this reaction at a preschool in China, or this one at a silk factory, or this one way up on a mountain where somebody had never seen an American. He was so frightened and everybody laughed at him. It was very sad. So when I flipped that camera around, watch what happened. Isn't that cute? He just posed and posed, and I got some beautiful shots of him and his sisters. Here's another little girl peeking from behind the beads. You can see that she's starting to see herself. Watch what happens. There she is. This is down on the Amazon in Peru. Here's another little girl way up near Lake Titicaca. This little boy had just too much fun. He was so excited about seeing himself. He jumped and he hid and he played, and finally I let him have the camera and take a picture of his mother. There he is, waving goodbye. What a fun time. You can be a true ambassador of your country. Also, don't forget to let someone else have the camera so that you're in a few pictures. Here are the kids at a school in Peru in the Amazon, and they can see themselves. Now what happens? I give them the camera, and they get to have some fun. And there we are in Peru. Fortunately, gave somebody else the camera, and we had a nice Christmas shot. Every time I'm in a restaurant with friends, I try to always get a shot of us. Remember, try to look your subjects in the eye. It makes for a much more intimate, interesting picture. See if you can get that twinkle. Also, find humor in the shot. Here are my cousins goofing around. This will be a picture for a lifetime. Don't know what she was doing up there. I guess she was brushing her teeth. And even a commandant can be funny. Ah! Oh, or you might get locked in the pokey. Here's my three-headed osprey from Florida. Nope, just mom and two fledglings. And their two fledglings in the city of Louisville, Kentucky. Ooh, and there's some kids ready for Halloween. I was scared to death when they started to open that door. Fortunately, it was locked. You can also zoom in or move closer. Here are my cousins. Don't they look nicer when we're tighter? Always take a telephoto lens or be ready to zoom. Here's a beautiful castle, but it's even more interesting up close. And here, very few people had brought a telephoto to see the sloth down in the Amazon. But I got a shot. Here we are in Russia again. What a beautiful set of churches. Do you know why there's a big one and a small one? Believe it or not, one is a summer church and the other is the winter church. This is not metal, it's actually aspen wood. You learn a lot when you travel and ask questions and take pictures. And of course, I always notice patterns. Look at this smiley face. Also, make sure to provide some context. Though close-ups are wonderful, sometimes you lose part of the story when you zoom in too close. You can always make a slideshow that has several shots, both the one with context as well as the one zoomed in. This is a lovely shot, again in the early days of digital. Look what happens though when I provide context. Isn't that wonderful? This This is the end of part 1. Aloha for now, but please join me for part 2. Taking great pictures.